Hello. I'm sorry for posting this video a little bit later. I usually try to have at least one video up there for you on Monday morning, and then I usually try to post more by the end of the day on Monday, so they're there, by Tuesday at the latest. That's kind of the schedule I've been going with, as you've noticed. Like I said in my email, I had a problem with the microphone on my laptop. I actually recorded, a full-length video, like, 15 minutes or whatever, and then I went to my editing software and I get into it and it just has no sound. So that's great. That's cool to have done last night. This same video with no audio. Luckily, it seems that my microphone is working again. At least I hope so. If you're watching this right now, um, I don't really know what happened. I tried to clean it, which I guess this is what I get for trying to clean my laptop. I sprayed some of this like screen cleaner on it, and the next thing you know, my microphone wasn't working. So maybe there's some kind of connection there. So I don't normally, clean my laptop. Not really that kind of person. Okay, so yes, let's get into it. You should have, or coming up soon, very soon, your short story essay is due by the end of the day, Monday, the 26th here. So we'll try to get that in by the end of the day. As always, you can email me if you still have any questions about it. My comments, you should have read my comments on your rough draft and all that. I will say, even if you're not able to get it in by the end of the day, even if you're just kind of realizing now, like, oh shit, this is due, I gotta get it done. Still do it, still work on it, still submit it. I take late work, as you might know, and these essays are going to be really important for your grade. If you look back at the syllabus with the breakdown of the grades, these essays are really the most important thing. So if you're going to focus your efforts on one thing for this class, I would make it that essay, the short story essay. Okay, but yes, that was due. So, I know this is tough and it's hard to stay motivated this semester. I'm right there with you. But in the spirit of, sticking with it, getting through it, making progress, we do need to turn to our next essay, which is going to be about poetry. So just like this last one was about, we focused on short stories. For this one, we're going to read several poems. I think something like 6 or 7 poems, maybe. Some are kind of songs too. I know that we don't like to hear this. I know that you're very, upset by this. Maybe it's going to be okay. I promise. Just like so many other things that I've said with this class, I think that the way that poetry, especially, gets taught, in high school and stuff, and maybe even in other college classes, I think there's a lot of problems with it, and I think we can do a better job here. So I want to talk about some of the things that are unique about poetry and about how maybe our approach has to be just a little bit different than with short stories, right? We're still going to be doing the same thing, of course, in terms of looking for a message, and making an argument about what we think the story's saying about a certain topic, right? Um, we're still going to be writing a literary analysis essay in the same way we did before. It's just that the things that we look for are going to be a little bit different. Obviously, in a short story, we look for characters and setting and tone and mood and the plot. Really, is the main thing, right? The plot and the characters. Most poems, at least shorter poems, and I think pretty much all the ones that we're going to read, aren't really like narrative in the same way. They don't always tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Unless you're going back to like ancient poetry, like ancient epic poetry, excuse me, like Homer or something, where it used to be whole stories written in poetry. We don't really do that anymore, though, right? So the first thing I think we can say about what's unique about poetry is that it's much shorter. Um, there's less words to work with, and that's just like, it seems like an obvious thing, but it's a very fundamental thing if we're talking about analyzing a piece of literature, is how many words there are that make up the piece of literature, because it's all just words, really, right? It's all words put together. So we have fewer words to work with. So I think this can be a problem, and it can be a source of annoyance with poetry, because I think for this reason, because there's fewer words, some people, and especially some teachers, will just kind of grab onto one word and make their whole interpretation out of that. Like it's easy because there's less, okay, because the things that happen in the text are like the evidence for our argument, right? Like we've been saying and we did with our last essay. If there's less words, sometimes you might be, oh, well, okay, I can have less evidence then, like there's going to be less evidence. So I'll just pick up on one, like one specific word and construct my whole interpretation out of what this is. This is like, I've talked about symbol hunting before, and I think this is kind of similar to that. So I think the kind of unnecessary interpretations, we see this with poetry even more, right? But I think that's a choice. I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think our interpretations of poems have to be outlandish or far-fetched, I think that we can still base our argument in evidence with poetry. We just need to kind of shift how we look at poetry so that we can see the evidence that is there. So I don't think we need to be like those, those kind of too symbolic interpretations. Okay, so on this point of there being fewer words, right? The obvious point. It does mean though that word choice is more important, right? That we can kind of dissect the word choice, and again, without going overboard, like I was saying, but in a way that's grounded in a text, in a way that we can provide evidence for and back up. We do want to look more though at like the word choice, because if you think about it from the point of view of the author, it's just fewer words makes each of them kind of more important, and all, especially in terms of word choice, things like repetition. Like if you see the same word coming up over and over again, that should be kind of a red flag. Like there's something going on here, right? So then the next step is to be like, well, what is going on here? What is the poem doing? Why does this word keep coming up? What's the point? And then you're kind of on your way to an interpretation, right? An interpretation that I think is grounded in the evidence of the poem. So like it's really important with poetry just to like notice things, like anything that seems weird or something that sticks out or something that's repeated. Okay, another thing that's unique about poetry, how it's different. In poetry, we have to think a lot more about the form that the poem takes. Short stories are all, they're all paragraphs, right? They might be different lengths. Some are 15 pages, some are 5 pages, but they're mostly paragraphs, and then pages and like that. So there's not a lot of difference in the form of short stories. There might be difference in, the writing style and things like that. But in terms of the physical, how it looks on the page, there's not really a lot of things you can do with a short story. With a poem, this is very different, as you know. There's a lot of decisions of like, where do you do a line break? Do you have like 15 words? Do you have a whole sentence on the first line? Or do you just skip a line and then it just has one word on a line? Like, do you have 3 words on the line? Like, what does it look like? There's a lot of like decisions and choices to be made there. And also, like, in terms of the form of it, you think about stuff like rhyming. Is a poem going to rhyme? That's a big decision because we have, if you make a poem that rhymes, you're kind of fitting in with the conventional approach to poetry, and like, you run the risk of it sounding like corny, or like it makes people think of Dr. Seuss if a poem rhymes in a certain way and stuff. So it's like, as an artist, like like the poet has to think like, am I going to fit in with the tradition of rhyming poems, or well, now we're at the point where there's also a tradition of not rhyming poems, So whichever one of those you do, you're kind of associating yourself in a certain way. And it's like we get into questions like why do poems rhyme, or like think about music. Like I'm sure the songs that you listen to, I'm sure most of them rhyme, at least in part, And it's like, why do we do that? What's the point? Why is it important that it does that? What does it add to do that? Like, what does rhyming and form add to poetry that you couldn't get if it was a short story? Similar to this is rhythm, right? We know this in music that the lyrics to a song have a certain rhythm to them, that goes along with a beat. Poetry also does this. If you think about something like if you've read like Edgar Allan Poe, he, I think, maybe better than any of the other like classic type poets that you might read in school. I think he does the most interesting stuff with rhythm. If you've read like The Raven, it does this what you might hear of called iambic pentameter, whatever. I'm not concerned with that phrase, but it just means like this certain kind of rhythm. Like in the Raven, one of the lines are like once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary. It's got this like and that's what's meant by iambic pentameter, and that's like a kind of certain rhythm that a poem can have, you know. So I think a lot of poems have some kind of rhythm, you know. So like we can see how that one is more like traditional and conservative and classical and stuff, right? So then if you give it a different rhythm, a faster rhythm or a much slower rhythm, like how does that change like the reader's experience of the poem? And another thing to think about with all this stuff about the form, the rhyming, the rhythm, how it looks on the page, is like a question we always want to be thinking about when we're reading poetry is like, is there a way that the form, the way that it's written, connects to the message that it's sending? You know, like especially with the poems that we're reading, which, you know, as I'll talk about a lot more coming up, they're all going to be from the American Civil Rights Movement. So in that context, it's like if you're, you know, if you're writing a more traditional form, are you being like mainstream? Are you trying to fit in? And if you write like some kind of crazy form with no rhyming and it's all like experimental and stuff, are you being more like revolutionary? Are you like breaking with tradition more? Um, so yeah, that's something we always want to think about, the connection between form and like the content or the poem or like the meaning of the poem or what the message is trying to send. Last thing I'll say about poetry here is that poetry is meant to be read out loud in a way that short stories just aren't. Back when poetry for most of history really was like the dominant form of literature. The novel really becomes the big one in like, you know, the mid 1800s. So for most of human history, poetry was the thing. And part of that is that it was read out loud. People would do readings. You know, it developed from oral tradition, going back to ancient times and stuff. Um, and then like you know, the Odyssey, I think is supposed to have been mostly oral, and then somebody wrote it down. Um, so like poetry has always been meant to be read out loud, and like the great poets of their time, they would do, you know, readings. They would at a bookstore or like maybe a bigger venue if they're famous or whatever. But I think it's important that we think of them as read out loud because I think it helps us experience the kind of rhythm and the rhyming and stuff like that. Just like if you look at the lyrics to a song on the page, unless you're reading very closely or like trying to be very creative and imaginative, like when paying very close attention, you probably won't be able to get the same kind of rhythm that you hear from the song itself, you know? So we have to keep that in mind when we're reading poetry, that if you read it out loud, you might get something more from it. And I hope that's what we see with what I'm doing with the bells. So let me just say about that assignment I have for you this week. Kind of what I'm hoping to do first this week is just start to have a little introduction to like poetry and that we're going to look at poetry. So with the bells, we're not going to be writing about that. That's not going to be something that I'm going to give you for the essay. It's kind of a poem that I think shows us something important about like why do we need poetry? Like why is poetry necessary? You know, which I feel like is something we would probably say it's not necessary. You know, so that's kind of what I want us to get from that. So I have so you should read that poem, The Bells, first and see what you get out of it in terms of rhythm and rhyming and stuff when you're reading it. And then watch that YouTube video I posted of someone else reading it and see if you have different experience. And then I have the discussion related to that. All right, well, that's all that I want to say for now. I will have an assignment sheet coming for you soon for this poetry essay with all the due dates and stuff like that. But, you know, we're going to take, you know, like something like a month. So I'll have the specifics for you soon. But yeah, until then.